Yeah, I was born on a couch in the neighborhood Christiania. The same couch my little sister and my older sister are born on. Christiania is a very special and unique place. It's the name of the neighborhood I grew up in. In 1971, an army base in central Copenhagen was abandoned, and the area got squatted basically by students and homeless people and criminals and vagrants of the worst sort. The neighborhood basically got itself together and kicked out all the hard drugs, so only soft drugs remained. So we now have one of the only neighborhoods in the world that is run by itself. It's fairly autonomous. We don't have a police force. We don't have what other neighborhoods have. What we have is conversation. Most people don't get to film in our Pusher Street, but I do. I just basically go down there and I tell the guys, the drug dealers, I say, hey, I'm just going to do a few photos with my boys over here. Can I have a couple of you guys to be like stand-ins at the barrel with fire over here? So yeah, they're all they're real life thugs. Mama said that it was okay. Mama said that it was quite alright. Our kind of people had a bed for the night, and it was okay.
My name is Kim Fubs Åkesson. I am 58. I am a writer of books and also scripts for television and movies. And right now I live in Østerbro, which is like the neat area of Copenhagen. I moved to Christiania in the mid-80s. I wasn't very interested. I met this girl and she lived there and had been a Christianist, as we call them, since the beginning of the squatting in the 70s. So I just came out there without any kind of desire to live there, but soon I discovered the pros and the cons and lived there for 12, 13 years almost. My eldest daughter was born there in our house. So I had a pretty long history actually with living there. I was in the mid-80s, 30-ish. We lived in the beginning when the squatting took place in the 70s, the good houses were taken first. Then when the good houses were gone, people started looking at the other buildings. Our house was an old stable for big trucks with big gates, and some hippies put in windows and handcraft. So we just continued building on this house. And in the beginning, I was kind of amazed, that the sense of freedom, and you could build your house the way you wanted it, and you could live. There was a lot of different ways to live up there, and a kind of freedom I'd hadn't experienced in Danish society. We have a democracy, but it's also very controlled, a lot of rules, a lot of ways. We have to ask the city hall if you want to put in a window anywhere. And there was this sense of freedom, and this is my house. I build it the way I want to build it. But then slowly other sides appeared. Christiania's big problem has been the criminal scene, the weed market, which is big thing, big money. And every time you have a criminal environment, you also have violence or the threat of violence. This is how you solve your problems in a criminal world. You cannot take it to court and say, we have this dispute over this weed trade. You have to deal with it, with power, with force. So there's this very big violent scene out there, still is. And that stands for the complete opposite of the spirit of Christiania, which is mindfulness and peace. And so this led to a lot of big meetings, discussions for hours and hours and hours, and every time something was decided, rules about how to act and so on, there was no police force, there was nothing to kind of make sure that it happened then. So it was just decisions in blue air, and we couldn't. It was really hard to deal with this very tough scene. So this is Christiania's big problem, and has always been, and still is. We lived in a very calm area. Christiania is like, a city. We have like the countryside, which is kind of certain kind of people, and there's like the city center, which is like where the wheat market is, and all the cafes and concerts. And we lived like in the suburbs of Christiania, which is like a very calm area. So you could actually live there and not experience anything. Sometimes when they had been fighting the police, tear gas and stuff, we read about it in the papers. We hadn't like heard it. And very soon you start taking another route. You kind of bypass the street of wheat trade, not to, because it's not a very pleasant scene, and you were not allowed to run. You would be beaten up if you ran, because everybody panicked if one started running. All the pushers were like, what's happening? So it was illegal to run, and it was not a very pleasant scene. So you just, when you lived there, you bypassed it. And but I mean, it came into our life because my wife at that point, her son, which was not my son, became a trader and a pusher, and went to prison, and lived this life of gangster's life, where you're like outside society. You don't have any connection with ordinary job, and he was a pusher for many years. And my ex-wife became a lawyer, so this was really a strange thing in our life. Well, it was my project to get us out. I was really worn out by all the meetings, and also not going to them was also kind of people would come to you the next day and, where were you, man? We needed you, So it was like a lot of bad conscience. So in the end, I was like, let's move out. I mean, my wife became a lawyer. All my work was outside. More and more our friends lived outside. So we were like, just filling up space there. We didn't do anything good for the society of Christiania. So we moved out. And for me, it was a big relief, I have to say. Not having to deal with all the problems, being in among people who were nicely brought up, and not all the yelling and this whole air of violence, or the possibility of violence. And our daughter was 11. She cried all the way. I mean, she had a horse down in the stables. She had a lot of friends, cousins out there also. So for her, it was like a tragedy to move out. But for the adults, it was a big relief. If you want to live in Christiania, you have to participate. I mean, or the whole idea kind of disappears and crumbles. And if you're not ready to do that, to be active and be an activist and go to the meetings and involve, you shouldn't be there. I think and a lot of people live there anyway. I mean, because it's cheap and it's a nice place in the city, and and you have a garden, and you have 10 minutes to City Hall. It's a nice place, a cheap place. So there's a lot of people living there, just living there. But it kind of ruins the whole point of having it. I got rid of my bad conscience when we left, and it was in that sense a great relief. But I have to say, some of the things you also easily miss. We've been looking a lot to live a place with some of the qualities, that knowing your neighbors and mingling with people in your street, and this can be quite hard to find. This is why this area is so overpriced, because it has this sense of people living close, knowing each other. Because some of the when we went looking for a house or something, a place to live, it was like, you want to live here, this dead street, like fences and isolation, and so some of the qualities is also easy to miss when you leave Christiania. It had a lot of impact on my professional life, because I was able to live for almost nothing. So for years I managed I was an illustrator and a writer, and it was really hard to make a living, but it was possible because of Christiania. So I had all these years, I was kind of building up my business, and when we left, I was able to live a professional life as an illustrator and as a writer. Yeah, I think the Danish singer Lucas Graham is my daughter's cousin. We lived 2 houses from each other, and I think for him, he was like all the time sniffing around in the a very open environment of creative people, and there was very early on he was a rapper in the beginning, and he was rapping at Christmas parties, and in the big one in the Grey Hall every year there's a big Christmas party.
You can say 7 years is like a perfect window into our world, because you get to hear about the criminal guys, you get to hear about my father, you get to hear about dreams, hopes and ambitions, and then you have a song that is hookless. I think I smoked my first blunt when I was 12. I'm from a neighborhood called Christiania in Copenhagen. It's an army base that was abandoned in 1970 and got squatted in 1971 by homeless people, hippies, vagrants and junkies and criminals. So I grew up in a neighborhood with no police force, no street lights, no cars, no leashes on the dogs. Police would come in and beat the hell out of people. And when you were 10 years old and you see people getting their arms broken and their faces smashed, and you remember, like when I smell tear gas, I remember my kindergarten times.
And he was like having his first experiences as a rapper on stage, So I think for some people it really means a lot. I mean, it really has a big effect on their life, and they meet a world that's pretty open for some things, for creative, crazy ideas. It's a really great place to stay.
I'm still learning about life. My woman brought children for me, so I can sing them all my songs and I can tell them stories. Most of my boys are with me, some are still out seeking glory. Some I had to leave behind, my brother, I'm still sorry. Some of my friends got shot. Some of my friends died of overdoses and stuff like that. And some of my friends are in and out of jail seeking glory.
So for him it meant a lot. For my daughter, not so much, I think. I mean, she had a happy childhood, which is not bad, but I don't know if it affected her choices in life later on. I think being able to have, a decent life without being rich. I mean, and also decent, living conditions. We had this system. You don't own your house. Mm-hmm. You can live there, but when you leave it, you leave it. So it was the area meeting that decided who was to move in. And we could give a big house to a woman alone with 3 kids and no money and say, this is your house now because you need it. You need the space. And when you move out into Copenhagen, it's really rough, It's a tough, to have a place to live if you don't have any money. It's really hard. So I think this is one of the things that you could do in Christiania, like cut out the money issue and go straight for desires and needs, which was a good thing. I think the whole democracy didn't really work very well. I mean, the whole idea of us, finding out together the interests and agendas were so different, and it was because we didn't have like a police force to make sure that the decisions were like reality afterwards, made it impossible, and made Christiania like divided into these two worlds: the peace and mindful department, and the violence and the money department. And I think it's the Hells Angels who's running the wheat market still, and they're really not Christiania. They're really into something else. It seems that this is quite some years since I moved out. I moved out 15 years ago, maybe a little more now. It seems that the government has found a solution kind of to, suddenly people own their houses. Yeah. They have like other rights than we had back then. And kind of normalizing it, making it a more ordinary part of the city, and they're really trying to hit hard in the wheat market. They're just spreading it all over town, but it's smaller than it has ever been right now, at the moment at least. So it seems that they're going for normalization, to take away the violence, but also the weirdness and craziness and the nice things about Christiania. I think both will probably be downgraded. Well, in some ways, everybody out there is, having to deal with, lots of the things from the Danish government. There were some people who really lived outside, but there was a lot of people living outside, but with, being handed over money from social welfare or unemployment money, and so it was like a strange mix of living outside and not really living outside, because there were some nice benefits of being in the Danish society. So I think the criminals, when I look at my stepson back then, he was really into like another society of the wheat market and the criminals he was surrounded by. And the brotherhood, when they were like, he had this record of not having an ordinary job until he was 40. So he had a strange life in a way, and where they had this, when someone went to jail, they took care of his dog and his children or his family. They were paying for making up for the loss in income he had when he was in prison. So they had like a whole system of brotherhood and criminal social welfare. It was kind of funny because it's some things were very accepted. You could be a drunk, you could be like unemployed, you could be, we had a guy dressing up as Santa Claus 25/7, all year round. It was okay, but if you like were too well dressed or you were too like, that was frowned upon, It was like, hey, what's your problem, man? So it was like other things were accepted, and then things that would be, okay in the Danish society was like, yeah, right. If you were too rich or too, something. So it was like a society with, stuff allowed and stuff frowned upon like any other society. And yeah, with a lot of with a dark side, because it's all freedom is also kind of not caring, not interfering, not minding your own business is also a sign of freedom. There's a lot of stories out there because it's a weird place and weird people. I remember when I first went to my first meeting, and I came from a pretty straight place in life, and I have lived, I grew up in a really suburb with, nothing interesting to tell. And my first meeting out there, I was the first one who had something to say. It was like one of the small meetings for the area. She would like to have like $200 for a shaman to come and clean her her living place, because there were some bad vibes from the former inhabitant of this place. And I was like, what? And nobody was laughing. Nobody was like, yeah, right. Yeah, okay, how much you say? $200. Is that enough for a shaman? I was like, excuse me, are you kidding me? So there was this, in a way, a completely another mindset, and other things were like accepted, and and the way people were talking to each other was also really, I mean, some of the meetings, you know, yelling and calling each other names, and I was like, wow, man, this place is weird. So the whole cultural things, it really blew my mind in the beginning. It was so strange, and it was funny in the beginning. It really wore you out in the end. I moved in the first years, it was much more Wild West, even more Wild West. There was no kind of construction of democracy, meetings, anything. It was chaos, and someone said once, when you throw out the sheriff, Jesse James will come. So there were criminals, I mean, crazy people who had like a space of, you know, where they could act out. And a lot of heroin and junkies, and there was a local group of bikers, criminal bikers, called Bullshit. They were fighting Hells Angels for a long time. And some of the big achievements in Christiania was kind of getting rid of all the junkies and the heroin, making it a straight weed market, and getting rid of the bikers was also a big thing, you know. That where you kind of felt, okay, sometimes when enough was enough, everybody would gather around and kind of make it happen. So this was when you kind of had the sense that, okay, we can do a lot of things, you know, when we get together and go to the street and say enough is enough. But then again, it kind of, you know, often fell back into a long time with, or whatever. There's a lot of, you know, of ordinary life also, which is funny to see, you know, how civilization settles, you know, in anywhere. People kind of also make a living and find out how to, you know, get along. So this is part of, and this is the whole ordinary life thing. Is don't ever, you know, hit the news. It's always fighting or, you know, raids and criminals but the ordinary life out there is quite astonishing sometimes to see how people get around and fight life. You're not